June 6, 1944, 7:15 a.m. A German naval officer stands on the Normandy coast, arm extended, pointing at the impossible. Behind him, soldiers stare in the same direction, frozen. The horizon has disappeared. In its place, 5,000 ships, battleships, destroyers, landing craft swarming like locusts. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the only German commander who might have stopped this, is 500 miles away in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. The officer drops his arm. His voice barely works. Get headquarters on the phone, now. But headquarters can't help. The Panzer divisions sit 100 miles inland, awaiting Hitler's personal approval to move. Hitler's still asleep. His aides won't wake him. He watched films late last night. By the time anyone with authority responds, 156,000 Allied troops will be ashore. The officer keeps staring at the ships. This is the photograph that becomes legend. The moment a war changed because the right man was in the wrong place. By early 1944, Erwin Rommel was already a legend. The Desert Fox, Hitler's favorite battlefield commander. The man who nearly took Cairo, who turned North Africa into a graveyard for British tanks. After his defeat in Tunisia, Hitler gave him a new mission: defend France from Allied invasion. Rommel arrived in Normandy that winter and saw a disaster. The Atlantic Wall, Germany's coastal fortress, was mostly propaganda. Concrete bunkers half-finished, minefields incomplete, troops undertrained. He demanded total control. 6 months, 4 million mines planted by hand, 500,000 beach obstacles, steel crosses, wooden stakes, concrete pyramids designed to rip apart landing craft. Rommel's obsession became doctrine: defeat them at the waterline or lose the war. He believed the Allies had one chance, a single day, to establish a beachhead. If Germany could throw them back into the sea within 24 hours, the invasion would fail. His leather gloves, always pristine, rested on maps of Calais. That's where he expected them. High tide, perfect weather. Calais. He was certain. Certainty is the enemy of preparation. Early June 1944. Rommel sat in his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon, a Renaissance chateau carved into white cliffs overlooking the Seine. Outside, rain hammered the courtyard. Inside, he reviewed meteorological reports with his staff. German weather stations predicted storms across the English Channel for at least 2 weeks. His meteorologist, a Luftwaffe captain, pointed to the charts. Herr Feldmarschall, invasion is impossible in these conditions. Rommel nodded. Meanwhile, 100 miles across the Channel, Allied meteorologists found something different. A young RAF officer named James Stagg identified a narrow window, 36 hours of marginally acceptable weather, starting June 5th. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, faced the hardest decision of his life: postpone again and risk discovery, launch in terrible weather and risk catastrophe. He chose to launch. Back in France, Rommel made his own calculation. His wife Lucy's 50th birthday was June 6th. He'd bought her shoes in Paris, rare luxuries in wartime. His intelligence officer mentioned unusual radio traffic detected overnight. Rommel waved it off. Allied deception. They want us nervous. The weather chart sat on his desk, contradicting the reports 100 miles away. 2 sets of data, 2 opposite conclusions. Wars are won by whoever makes the right bet on incomplete information. But Rommel couldn't act even if he'd guessed correctly. Hitler's paranoia had created a fatal flaw in German command structure. The Panzer divisions, Germany's only mobile striking force capable of crushing an invasion, sat under Hitler's personal control. Rommel commanded the Atlantic Wall's static defenses, but the armor that could actually win the battle, that required a phone call to Berlin and Hitler's approval. For months, Rommel had argued with his superiors. Give me control of the Panzers, or we lose France. Hitler refused. I'll decide when and where they're needed. The Führer kept the divisions scattered inland, away from the coast, positioned to respond to wherever the real invasion came, because he, like Rommel, expected a feint at Normandy and the main assault at Calais. On June 5th, Rommel left anyway. He climbed into his staff car at dawn. "Nothing will happen in this weather," he told his deputy, General Friedrich Dollmann. Dollmann, left in command, had clear orders: maintain routine patrols, report anything unusual, but under no circumstances deploy the Panzers without authorization from Berlin. On Hitler's desk, 500 miles away, sat unsigned deployment orders. They'd sit there for hours, while the most important battle of the war began without them. D-Day planning had started 2 years earlier. Rommel had 6 months to prepare. The best general can't win without authority to act. Night, June 5th to 6th. While Rommel slept in a German guest room, 5,000 Allied ships crossed the English Channel in darkness. The largest armada ever assembled. Battleships, destroyers, transport vessels, landing craft. A floating city moving through rough seas toward Normandy's beaches. German radar operators along the coast picked them up. Massive returns. Hundreds of blips. But the reports coming back made no sense. "Weather anomaly," one officer wrote. "Equipment malfunction," wrote another. The sheer impossibility of invasion in a storm convinced them the readings were false. At Rommel's headquarters, the black telephone began ringing. Junior officers stared at it. Who had authority to answer? Dollmann was asleep. Rommel was 400 miles away. Hitler had given strict orders, no major decisions without his approval. The officers did what military bureaucracy does best: nothing. They filed reports and waited for daylight. Meanwhile, 23,000 Allied paratroopers dropped inland behind the beaches. German sentries heard aircraft, saw parachutes, and opened fire. Scattered firefights erupted in darkness. Radio reports flooded headquarters. "Paratroopers at Sainte-Mère-Église. American troops near Carentan." Still, German high command convinced themselves this was the feint. The real invasion would come at Calais. First light would prove them right. Sometimes the truth looks so impossible, you call it a lie. 6:30 a.m., June 6th. Dawn broke over Normandy. German soldiers in concrete bunkers along the coast raised their binoculars and froze. The ocean had vanished. In its place, ships. Thousands of ships stretching to the horizon. Battleships firing salvos that shook the earth. Destroyers launching rockets. Landing craft swarming toward shore like insects. One soldier would later describe it as the end of the world made visible. Frantic calls flooded headquarters. Thousands of ships off Omaha Beach. Utah Beach under assault. Gold, Juno, Sword, they're hitting everything. Officers tried reaching Rommel. Every telephone line jammed. Some cut by French resistance. Others clogged with panicked reports. Dollmann, Rommel's deputy, faced paralysis. He couldn't deploy the Panzers. Only Hitler could authorize that. He couldn't wake Hitler. The Führer's aides had strict orders never to disturb his sleep before 10 a.m. At 9:15 a.m., someone finally reached Rommel by phone at his home in Germany. The connection crackled. "The invasion is here. Where are you?" Rommel's response came quickly. "I'll be back by afternoon." His staff car was already being prepared. 4-hour drive minimum. Maybe 5 with Allied aircraft controlling the skies. By afternoon, 156,000 Allied troops would be ashore. His car sped through German villages, Rommel's gloves gripping the seat, knowing he was racing toward a battle already lost. Hesitation is just slow-motion defeat. 10:15 a.m. In his bedroom at the Berghof, Hitler finally woke. Aides briefed him carefully. "Mein Führer, the Allies have landed in Normandy." Hitler, still groggy, waved them off. A diversion. The real invasion comes at Calais. He'd studied the intelligence for months. Calais was closer to England. Better ports. Shorter supply lines. Obviously, that's where Eisenhower would strike. Normandy had to be a feint, a sacrifice to draw German armor away from the real target. "Do not deploy the Panzers," Hitler ordered. His generals tried to argue. Rommel's chief of staff called from France. "We need armor now, or the beachhead solidifies." Hitler refused. Hours passed. Reports intensified. By 1 p.m., the evidence became undeniable. This wasn't a diversion. This was the invasion. At 4 p.m., 9 hours after the first troops hit the beaches, Hitler finally released the Panzers. By then, Allied fighter bombers owned the skies. The Panzer divisions, trying to move toward Normandy, found every road clogged with refugees, cratered by bombs, or strafed by aircraft. Tank columns that should have reached the coast in 2 hours took 12. At Rommel's headquarters, the black telephone sat silent now, its receiver still warm from 100 panicked calls. Back on the beaches, Allied engineers were already clearing obstacles, unloading artillery, establishing supply depots. Eisenhower had gambled on terrible weather, betting the Germans would never imagine an invasion in a storm. The false certainty of German high command, convinced this was a diversion with the real invasion still coming, had given the Allies exactly what they needed: time. The right decision at the wrong time is still wrong. Rommel's staff car raced through France. Allied P-47 Thunderbolts controlled the skies, hunting any vehicle that moved. His driver swerved between bomb craters, accelerated through villages, took back roads to avoid main highways. Rommel sat in the back seat, receiving updates by radio, each report worse than the last. By noon, 50,000 Allied troops ashore. By 2 p.m., 75,000. By 4 p.m., 100,000. The numbers climbed with sickening inevitability. Every hour, the Allies advanced 1 to 2 miles inland. Every hour, more landing craft hit the beaches. The Atlantic Wall, 4 million mines, 6 months of construction, billions of Reichsmarks, had held for approximately 90 minutes before being breached at 5 separate points. At 7 p.m., Rommel finally arrived at his headquarters. He walked into the operations room, his uniform dusty from the road. Officers stood at attention. Maps covered the walls, red markers showing Allied penetration points spreading like infection. Rommel studied them in silence. Someone handed him the latest casualty reports. His first words: "The war is lost." The staff froze. Field marshals didn't say such things. But Rommel understood mathematics. 156,000 troops ashore on day 1. The Allies would land 1 million within a month. Germany couldn't match those numbers. His staff car, parked outside, had 17 bullet holes from Allied strafing runs. He'd counted them. 17 holes. His driver had survived by swerving into a ditch. Speed without timing is just waste. June 7th to 8th. Rommel toured the devastated coastal defenses. Concrete bunkers shattered by naval gunfire. Minefields cleared by explosive charges. Beach obstacles destroyed or pushed aside by tanks. The Atlantic Wall, impregnable on paper, had been defeated in hours. At Omaha Beach, the bloodiest of the landings, 4,000 American casualties bought a foothold that was now a flood. Within 48 hours, 175,000 Allied troops occupied Normandy, with more arriving every hour. Rommel drafted a report to Hitler, choosing his words carefully. The enemy's superiority is crushing in ground forces, air support, and naval artillery. We cannot hold without immediate reinforcements. Hitler's response came by telegram. Hold every inch, no retreat. Every position is to be defended to the last man. Rommel read it twice, then set it aside. He understood now. This wasn't a battle for Normandy. This was the beginning of Germany's end. Back at La Roche-Guyon, his leather gloves, the ones he'd packed so carefully for the trip to Germany, sat on a shattered map of the Normandy coast. Not Calais, Normandy. He'd been wrong about the location, wrong about the weather, wrong to leave his post. The invasion had succeeded not because of Allied genius — Eisenhower had nearly canceled it due to weather concerns — but because of German paralysis. Hitler's refusal to delegate authority, the rigid command structure that required permission from Berlin for every major decision, the telephone that had rung unanswered while he celebrated a birthday 500 miles away. Defense without flexibility is just an expensive grave. By late June, Rommel had done the calculations a dozen times, testing different variables, searching for a scenario where Germany could still win. If the Panzers had been deployed at dawn on June 6th instead of late afternoon, if he'd been at headquarters to authorize immediate counterattacks, if Hitler had trusted his field commanders with tactical authority, the numbers kept coming back the same. A 6-hour delay had allowed 50,000 additional Allied troops to land unopposed. Those troops had consolidated the beachhead, brought up anti-tank weapons, established artillery positions. By the time German armor finally arrived, the battle was already lost. The black telephone, now sitting silently on his desk at the defeated headquarters, became a symbol of everything wrong with the Nazi command structure. Communication without authority equals useless noise. A telephone that could ring but couldn't authorize the one decision that mattered. Rommel's private conclusion, never stated in official reports: Germany will lose the war. Not might lose, will lose. The Atlantic Wall was supposed to be impregnable. It had fallen in a day. If the West could land 156,000 troops in terrible weather against prepared defenses, nothing could stop them. But Rommel kept this analysis quiet, shared only with trusted subordinates. Then came whispers of a different kind. Secret meetings, officers who spoke carefully about Germany's future after the current regime. Anti-Hitler conspirators approached him. Not directly, that would be too dangerous, but through intermediaries. Would he support a post-Hitler government? Would he negotiate peace with the Allies? Rommel listened. He didn't commit, but he didn't refuse. Some defeats teach you the war is already over. July 20th, 1944. A briefcase bomb exploded at Hitler's eastern headquarters, the Wolf's Lair. The assassination attempt, led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, failed. Hitler survived with minor injuries. The Gestapo response was immediate and ruthless. Thousands arrested, secret documents seized. Under interrogation, conspirators revealed networks, names, connections. Rommel's name appeared in papers found at a conspirator's home, not as an active plotter, but as someone who'd been sounded out, someone who might support a post-Hitler government. That was enough. Hitler faced a dilemma. Rommel was Germany's most popular general. His North Africa campaigns had made him a legend. Arresting him publicly would damage military morale. A trial would expose the conspiracy's extent, show how many officers had lost faith in the regime. Hitler chose a quieter solution. On October 14, 1944, 2 generals arrived at Rommel's home in Hellingen. They carried a message from Hitler. The choice was simple: public trial for treason, execution, family disgrace, and pension revoked, or suicide, state funeral with full honors, family protected, pension preserved, and official cause of death listed as complications from injuries sustained during an Allied air attack. Rommel had 15 minutes to decide. He spent 10 of them with his wife Lucy and their 15-year-old son Manfred. Then he walked outside, climbed into the general's staff car, and drove a few miles down the road. He took the cyanide pill while the car was still moving. They found him slumped in the back seat, a family photograph next to him. Even legends become inconvenient. October 18th, 1944. Germany gave Rommel a state funeral, full military honors, flags at half-mast. Hitler sent a massive wreath with a personal message praising Rommel's service to the Reich. The man who'd ordered his death now mourned him publicly. Thousands attended. Generals who knew the truth stood silent. Lucy Rommel, dressed in black, accepted condolences from officers who delivered the ultimatum 4 days earlier. She knew. She said nothing. Silence kept her family alive. By August 1944, the Allies had liberated France. The Atlantic Wall, billions of Reichsmarks, 4 million mines, 6 months of Rommel's obsessive construction, sat abandoned, defeated in a single day. The Panzer divisions that should have crushed the invasion on June 6th had been destroyed piecemeal over the following weeks, arriving too late, moving too slowly, fighting without air cover. Military historians would later calculate that if Rommel had been at his headquarters on June 6th, if the Panzers had been released at 7 a.m. instead of 4 p.m., if German command structure had allowed field commanders to make tactical decisions without Berlin's approval, the invasion might have failed. Not certainly, but possibly. A 50-50 chance, some estimated. Eisenhower himself had prepared a letter taking full responsibility for failure. He'd expected it might not work. But the letter was never sent. Rommel's leather gloves, the ones that had sat on maps of Calais, now rested on his closed casket. Wrong location, wrong timing, wrong bet. The regime that demands perfection kills even its perfect servants. In the decades after the war, military historians dissected D-Day obsessively. What if Rommel had stayed at his headquarters on June 6th? What if Hitler had given him control of the Panzers? What if German meteorologists had found the same 36-hour weather window that Allied forecasters identified? The counterfactuals multiplied. Some historians estimated a 50-50 chance the invasion could have been repelled if the Panzers had been deployed immediately at dawn. Others argued the outcome was inevitable. Allied air superiority and numerical advantage would have won regardless. But everyone agreed on one thing. The 6-hour delay between the invasion's start and Hitler's authorization to deploy armor was catastrophic. Those 6 hours allowed the Allies to establish beachheads, move inland, and bring up anti-tank weapons. By the time German armor arrived, it faced prepared positions instead of scattered infantry on exposed beaches. The weather bet itself was fascinating. Rommel had been mathematically correct. Invasion was statistically unlikely in such conditions. Eisenhower had taken a calculated risk with roughly 40% odds of acceptable weather. Rommel, seeing the same data, dismissed 40% as impossible. One man bet on the unlikely, the other dismissed it as absurd. Side by side, Allied and German weather reports from June 5th told contradictory stories from identical atmospheric data. Different conclusions, different gambles, different outcomes. The difference between victory and defeat was one man's birthday party. Today, a black telephone sits in a French military museum. The placard identifies it as the headquarters phone from Rommel's command center at La Roche-Guillaume, preserved behind glass, a relic of the longest day. The telephone represents something larger than missed calls and failed communication. It symbolizes the fundamental flaw in Nazi command structure: centralized authority without flexibility, communication without empowerment, a system where even field marshals couldn't make tactical decisions without permission from a dictator who refused to wake before 10 a.m. Final numbers. D-Day succeeded. Roughly 4,000 Allied casualties on June 6th, approximately 9,000 German casualties. Within a month, over 1 million Allied troops occupied France. By May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Rommel never saw it. He died in October 1944, 4 months after dismissing the possibility of invasion in bad weather. 7 months before the regime he'd served collapsed completely. The Atlantic Wall, proclaimed as impregnable, sits abandoned along the French coast, concrete bunkers slowly eroding into the sea. Military academies worldwide teach D-Day as a case study in leadership, delegation, and the fatal consequences of rigid command hierarchies. Decentralization versus micromanagement. Trust versus control. The lessons are simple. The applications remain difficult. Behind museum glass, the black telephone waits, silent now. In the end, the longest day wasn't lost on the beaches. It was lost 500 miles away at a birthday party by a general who bet on the impossible and left the phone to ring. Confidence without flexibility is just pride waiting to fall.